Leonardo da Vinci's Mental Models, Secrets of the World's Most Famous Polymath, written by Peter Hollins, narrated by Russell Newton. The painter has the universe in his mind and hands. Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci is universally recognized as a genius painter, polymath, and the world's first and truest Renaissance man. But who was he really? Beyond the abundant myths and conjecture about his life, Da Vinci was a man who was defined by nothing if not his insatiable curiosity. He was not just a painter, but an inventor, scientist, artisan, draftsman, philosopher, botanist, sculptor, musician, and nature lover. In fact, so diverse were his talents and interests that part of his appeal must lie in the fact that we sense in Da Vinci something that transcends superficial categories and speaks to something more subtle and profound. In this book, we'll be exploring the mind of, arguably, one of the greatest thinkers and creators of all time. His works are well known, and his biography has been told and retold countless times. Here, however, we will not look at what he thought, but how he thought, and perhaps glean some small insight to why. Da Vinci's life course has proved so fascinating that it's held our continued interest for more than 500 years, with modern scholars returning to his work again and again to find fresh insight into our modern-day problems. Whether you are a scientist, an artist, a little of both, or neither, you will hopefully find something in these pages to inspire you. By carefully studying the attitude and life philosophy of a man who was obsessed with learning, we can imbue our own lives with a little of that same passion and fire. Da Vinci demonstrated thinking that was broad as well as deep, flexible and inquisitive, three-dimensional and multisensory. He was self-directed and prolific, but also extremely meticulous in his organization. But the man was also an enigma, and historians continue to puzzle over some of his less well-understood tendencies and methods. In the chapters that follow, we'll take Da Vinci for our model and try to recreate some of his characteristics in our own lives, whether that's the ability to think holistically, to blur boundaries, or to cultivate the humility to continually subject yourself to a higher authority. Not wealth or fame, but the deeper mysteries of the universe itself. First of all, a little more about the man who inspired this book. Born the 24th of April in 1452 in the small Tuscan town of Vinci, Florence, the young genius had fairly humble beginnings. He was the son of the rich legal notary Messer Piero Frosino de Antonio da Vinci and a poor orphaned servant girl, Caterina de Mio Lippi. He was christened Leonardo de Piero da Vinci, and his full name meant Leonardo, son of Messer Piero from Vinci. The title Ser showed that his father was considered a gentleman. His parents were unmarried, and his conception possibly occurred while his father was engaged to someone else, so Leonardo's position in the family was somewhat contentious. He lived with his mother till he was 5, and then with his father, who had by then married a 16-year-old girl named Albiera. Together his father produced 12 more children and married 4 times, leaving Leonardo and his 7 brothers to fight over his father's estate after his death. The illegitimacy of his birth meant that Leonardo was officially recognized as Da Vinci's son, but received little attention, which resulted in a very informal education. He learned the rudiments of reading, writing, and arithmetic, but much of his learning occurred through his own efforts of observation and exploring the new ideas emerging in the Florentine milieu. At the age of 14, his father's connections allowed Leonardo to secure an apprenticeship under master painter Andrea del Verrocchio, who himself had studied under the sculptor Donatello. Leonardo worked hard and eventually became a paid employee, gradually embedding himself in the emerging Renaissance art scene that included Botticelli, Ghirlandaio, Michelangelo, a later rival, Masaccio, and Perugino. Da Vinci helped his master paint the Baptism of Christ, and legend has it that when Verrocchio saw the beauty of the angel Leonardo had created, he never painted again. At the time, the ultra-powerful and influential Medici family controlled much of the city, and in 1481, Da Vinci was commissioned by Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, to paint an altarpiece for the Church of San Donato. This work was never actually completed, however, a theme we will explore in a later chapter. From that point on, Da Vinci was employed by Ludovico Sforza, where he produced some of his most famous works, including The Virgin on the Rocks and The Last Supper. He also painted pieces for a wide variety of notable people, including King Louis XII of France. Leonardo was just 67 when he died, reportedly full of repentance and mourning. Astonishingly, he is reported to have said, "I have offended God and mankind because my work did not reach the quality it should have." In his will, he requested that 60 beggars bearing candles follow his casket during the funeral rites, and he was buried at the Chapel of Saint-Hubert in France. Da Vinci's pupil and heir, Francesco Melzi, inherited everything Da Vinci owned, including his tools, artworks, money, and countless books and notebooks. Da Vinci was celebrated during his lifetime and celebrated afterward. Giorgio Vasari, an art historian and author of Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, said of Da Vinci, "The loss of Leonardo was mourned out of measure by all who had known him, for there was none who had done such honor to painting. The splendor of his great beauty could calm the saddest soul, and his words could move the most obdurate mind. His great strength could restrain the most violent fury, and he could bend an iron knocker or a horseshoe as if it were lead. He was liberal to his friends, rich and poor, if they had talent and worth, and indeed, as Florence had the greatest of gifts in his birth, she suffered an infinite loss in his death." How to use this book. Though it's obvious the kind and extent of talents the Creator bestowed on Da Vinci, what talents have been given to you? What burning questions have been placed at the center of your being so that all your curiosity points forever toward that true north? Whether you believe in God or not, what kind of life would you have to have lived in order for you to say on your deathbed, "I have pleased God and mankind because my work reached the quality it should have"? Now, these may be lofty questions to begin with, especially if you've only picked up this book in an effort to improve your memory or learn a little self-discipline. Our patron of learning and Renaissance mentor, Da Vinci, however, was a man of excellence. His first challenge to us is to become clear on our purpose and our higher mission, and to strive for certain transcendence, even if we are only beginning with small things. Perhaps you are an aspiring painter or an artist yourself. Or perhaps you're an entrepreneur who is looking for a jolt of creative thinking and some inspiration for looking outside the box. Perhaps you are a student following a formal educational path. Or maybe, like Da Vinci himself, you have graduated from the school of life and are now interested in ways to become a more refined, original thinker. Maybe you're a poet, a philosopher, a tinkerer, a content creator, an athlete, a business owner, a parent, or an inventor. Maybe you want to learn a new language, write a novel, or just live a more creative, authentic life outside of convention. Whoever you are, and however you answer the above 3 questions, there's something in these chapters to inspire and encourage you. All that's required for this book and for life in general is an open mind, a willingness to experiment, and the courage to challenge yourself to take responsibility for your own intellectual development. Oh, and lots of notebooks. We're like dwarves perched on the shoulders of giants, and thus we're able to see more and farther than the latter. And this is not at all because of the acuteness of our sight or the stature of our body, but because we are carried aloft and elevated by the magnitude of the giants. Bernard of Chartres. When you think of Leonardo da Vinci, how do you imagine him? Perhaps it's easy to envision Da Vinci as he was at the end of his career, once he was already well known and accomplished. Perhaps it's easy to imagine that the young Leonardo always somehow knew that he was destined for greatness, and simply advanced to this famed endpoint as though it were a matter of fate. In reality, he started out pretty much like everyone starts. In other words, it even took Da Vinci himself time to become Da Vinci. Even though we today know him as a masterful painter and a million other things, the man himself began as an apprentice to the artists and great thinkers he admired and considered his most esteemed teachers. That's why we'll begin our book at the most appropriate place, the beginning, when Da Vinci was merely an apprentice. During the Renaissance period, it was customary to apprentice talented young individuals under a master who would guide and tutor their learning. When he was just 14 years old, Da Vinci became an apprentice to Andrea del Verrocchio, at a time a respected master artist. That was lucky for the boy, and securing such a prestigious opportunity was due mostly to his father's standing in the community. The artist-apprentice relationship was a serious and highly codified contract. Typically, it required extreme diligence and honesty from the apprentice, and involved mundane tasks like grinding paint pigments, priming paint panels, and preparing the studio. The master was deferred to in all things and trusted to tailor his teaching to his pupil's aptitude and temperament, advancing his study as and when he saw fit. As Da Vinci honed his skills, he would have gradually taken on more complex responsibilities, learning at Verrocchio's feet and potentially assisting him with paintings. Over the 6 years of his apprenticeship, Da Vinci's skills grew, and he evolved into a paid collaborator for Verrocchio. During the Renaissance, it was common for assistants to help with commissions, with specific stipulations in the contract designating the apprentices' and masters' responsibilities. This was artistic and moral training, but it also was an inculcation into the highly rarefied industry. Initially, the young apprentice would have received nothing but room and board for his tireless work. But eventually, by around 1473, Da Vinci was likely paid to help Verrocchio create the background of paintings. In 1472, Da Vinci presented his masterpiece, the Annunciation, to the Florence Painters Guild. The term masterpiece originated in the Middle Ages, when apprentices had to submit exemplary work for approval by their guild. The concept reflects the early roots of the modern concept of a thesis submitted for a master's degree at a university. Successful submission demonstrated adequate mastery, leading to the apprentice's promotion to master status and authorization to train others. Da Vinci joined the guild in 1472, marking an official recognition of his mastery. While Da Vinci continued working with Verrocchio for another 4 years, he eventually embarked on his own artistic journey. And the rest, as they say, is history. Da Vinci certainly went on to create his own unique style and become a master in his own right. But he first began not by exploring his own expression, but by imitating the work of his much more accomplished teacher. It was very common, for example, for students and apprentices' work to be almost indistinguishable from their masters. While this may seem a little odd for modern sensibilities, it was taken as a given in Da Vinci's time that one couldn't develop one's own unique talents and contribution unless one had first learned how to properly reproduce and emulate the works that had come before. The first step in our journey to mastery, then, is not to explore our own goals, desires, and perspectives more deeply, but to seek out a mentor. Willingly submitting to the program set for us by a more accomplished and hopefully wiser teacher is not just about ensuring we put ourselves through the right curriculum. It's also about learning to cultivate the humble, curious, and diligent mindset required of real mastery. The kind of mastery that was prevalent during that period in history that most reliably produced geniuses. Of course, today the educational landscape is not structured the way it was hundreds of years ago, and attitudes have changed considerably. That said, it is always possible to recreate that special master-student relationship and find mentoring that will genuinely help you thrive. First, it's worth understanding that there are 3 distinct modes or steps in a healthy apprenticeship. Deep observation, the passive mode. In this phase, individuals entering a new environment or career are advised to observe and absorb the rules, procedures, and social dynamics. The emphasis is on understanding the explicit and implicit rules governing success in the given field. Picasso, a painter who also received something of a classical training, is known to have said, "Learn the rules like a pro so you can break them like an artist." During this period, the apprentice is encouraged to mute their colors, avoid seeking attention, and focus on learning by careful observation. To the student who only desires quick and easy results, ostentation, and novelty, this part of learning may seem boring and unglamorous. You are, however, doing so much more than merely imitating your master. You are paying deep attention to the stated rules of your craft, the underlying work culture, and the power relationships within the industry you're working in. It's a way to pay respects to the traditions of your chosen field of inquiry, but also a time of hard work and investment. Back then, breaking the rules was considered a privilege you had to earn. Skills acquisition, the practice mode. Once the initial observation phase is completed, the apprentice moves to the active acquisition of skills. The apprenticeship system of the Middle Ages involved hands-on learning through imitation and repetition, but it also rested heavily on the relationship between the young learner and the master. Lessons were not just about the mere mechanics of the craft, but about the broader social, historical, cultural, religious, and metaphysical context of that art, and the many duties that came with it. In other words, one was not merely developing as a superficial artisan, but as a whole person with a comprehensive worldview and set of moral imperatives that accompanied their art. Unlike many modern and purely academic institutions, apprenticeship was a learning process that heavily emphasized tacit knowledge, i.e., a feeling for the skill that is hard to express in words, but only demonstrated through action. Experimentation, the active mode. This last phase involves transitioning to an even more active mode of experimentation and applying acquired skills. The apprentice is encouraged to take on more responsibility, initiate projects, and expose themselves to criticisms from peers or the public. They're beginning to stand on their own 2 feet, but gradually. The purpose is to gauge progress, identify knowledge gaps, and develop the ability to handle criticism constructively. How long each of the above phases lasts will depend on you, your current skill level, the thing you're trying to master, your chosen mentor, your goals, and much more. A good mentor, however, will be able to pay close attention to your progress and regulate your advance so that you're always progressing in a diligent but appropriately challenging way. Questions to ask. The right mentor for you may not be a wizened old person with a beard and a serious hat. In fact, the best tutors and mentors may take all sorts of unexpected forms. Whether they are institutional mentors within academic or professional settings, or elective mentors found in all sorts of other interesting places, these guiding figures can contribute significantly to your personal and intellectual development, if you choose them wisely, that is. To find mentors, explore various avenues that cater to your preferences and interests. Start by exploring online mentorship networks like Find a Mentor, which connects professionals seeking guidance with experienced mentors. Attend professional networking events, where business leaders often seek new contacts and partnerships. Join fitness classes or groups, or engage in volunteer events through platforms like Volunteer Match, which can connect you with like-minded professionals, especially those who have retired and are looking to give back. Industry-specific meetups, conferences, and trade shows are excellent for finding mentors tailored to your field. Another alternative is to leverage social media platforms, such as Twitter and LinkedIn, to identify potential mentors based on keyword searches and engagement levels. Lastly, don't underestimate the possibility of meeting mentors in any public location, from public transportation to restaurants and bars. Word of mouth can be almost magical in its ability to connect you to the right people. Put out the word and seek recommendations. As the Sufi mystics like to say, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Once you've found a potential mentor, ask yourself the following questions. Do they truly command their own subject? It goes without saying, but a mentor should genuinely possess superior knowledge in the subject compared to the mentee. Evaluation of the mentor's expertise involves assessing academic or artistic contributions, publications, and ongoing work, but the mentor's competence, rather than fame, should guide the selection process. This means that, depending on the subject, their credentials and education may not matter as much as their plainly evidenced skill. Be clear on your own goals and priorities, and identify a person who has demonstrated the competence you wish to develop in yourself. Too many people get drawn into coaches and gurus whose only skill is, arguably, self-marketing. When the noise and bluster is removed, there may be very little in the way of genuine skill to recommend such a person. If you are an absolute beginner, it may be okay to select someone who's merely more skilled than yourself, but if possible, look for someone who truly excels in the area, rather than someone who is merely adequate. Can they get the most out of their students? A good mentor maximizes the potential of students and collaborators by understanding their intellectual and character traits. Remember that possessing a skill and knowing how to teach are two different things. Genuine mentoring involves pushing individuals to set and achieve ambitious goals, rather than just providing comfort and validation. The student-mentor relationship should focus on leaving the mentee with new insights after each interaction. You may be tempted to go with someone nice, or who you get on well with, but focus instead on that person who will push you when you need to be pushed. Are they able to respond well to competition from their students? This is something few of us consider. While collaboration is essential, competition exists in mentor-mentee relationships. Healthy competition between generations is beneficial, but destructive competition, especially using social power, is cautioned against. External recognition can establish the mentee as an equal, not just a subordinate. How might your chosen mentor react to that? Do they have the maturity, wisdom, and grace to fully encourage your learning, wherever it may go? Unfortunately, some teachers are a little too fond of the elevated position they have above their pupils and wish to maintain it forever. A teacher who genuinely wants their students to reach their full potential without feeling threatened is worth their weight in gold. Are they open to approaches and attitudes other than their own? Mentors should pass on accumulated knowledge, but encourage diverse approaches, styles, and methodologies. Even a highly respected and esteemed teacher who possesses their single perspective and should actively encourage their student to learn widely, rather than subscribing to their own methods exclusively. The mentor's cultural background should be embraced, but mentees should also explore new frontiers of knowledge and avoid hindering progress. As you can see, a good mentor should possess both technical and relational abilities. They need to be able to manage and contain your learning in a way that prioritizes your unique growth without their own limitations and blind spots jeopardizing the process. Have any of their students become more accomplished professionals than them? This last question sets up quite a high bar, but it's possibly the most important on this list. Be curious about where ex-students of your master have ended up. A successful mentor should produce alumni who surpass them, at least some of the time, indicating the effectiveness of the mentor-student relationship. "Poor is the pupil who does not surpass his master," said Da Vinci, and, indeed, he did surpass his first master, Andrea del Verrocchio. Entering the great artist's studio as a mere errand boy in 1466, he exceeded him less than 10 years later. Says biographer Vasari in his book, Lives of the Most Eminent Painters, Sculptors, and Architects, he was placed then, as has been said, in his boyhood, at the instance of Ser Piero, to learn art with Andrea del Verrocchio, who was making a panel picture of St. John baptizing Christ, when Leonardo painted an angel who was holding some garments. And although he was but a lad, Leonardo executed it in such manner that his angel was much better than the figures of Andrea, which was the reason that Andrea would never again touch color, in disdain that a child should know more than he. Even to the untrained eye, the differences in the figure of Christ and the angel are apparent. Verrocchio's rendering of the hair is flat and lifeless compared to the almost supernatural way that the young Da Vinci infused the angel's hair with glowing light. Biographer Walter Isaacson later added, "Afterward, Verrocchio never completed any new painting on his own. More to the point, a comparison between the parts of the baptism of Christ that Leonardo painted with those done by Verrocchio shows why the older artist would have been ready to defer." Watch out for teachers who can only produce students who are copies of themselves and who never quite advance beyond their own level. Beware also of mentors who break ties with students the moment they surpass them. Ideally, a mentor's previous students should all become part of their extended network and continue to maintain a collaborative spirit long after training is over. It's a red flag if a tutor only trains those capable of becoming tutors themselves. An accomplished student should be able to achieve more than nominal success in the very same arena as his teacher. The world is your classroom. Genius is not only a what or a who, it is a where. It is grounded in a place every single time. Eric Weiner. A mentor is someone who can guide and shape your learning. By that definition, however, our environment itself can be considered a kind of mentor, in that it also influences the kind of people we can become and the sorts of things we can know. Here, the environment refers not just to the room you practice your craft in or the cafe you sometimes take a book to. It includes your entire socio-cultural milieu, your historical period, your social network, and your family. Rather than imagining that a genius is a rare and perfectly individual phenomenon springing up from nowhere, we can see it instead as a kind of flower that blooms on a much larger tree. Leonardo da Vinci was similarly a kind of flower that grew up on a very specific tree that was rooted in a specific time and place. During his initial years in Florence, Leonardo assisted Verrocchio on various projects, but as he matured, he eventually established his own studio in the city. His active involvement in the artistic community led to his membership in the Garden of San Marcos, where he enjoyed the patronage of Lorenzo de' Medici and completed a commission for the San Donato Scoppetto Church. Despite his success in Florence, Leonardo's life took a significant turn when he decided to leave for Milan. The move was prompted by two key factors: the opportunity to work under the patronage of Ludovico Sforza, the new Duke of Milan, and allegations of sodomy, which forced him to depart Florence. The transition marked a turning point in Leonardo's career, as he blossomed from a legendary figure in Milan, producing masterpieces that would define the Renaissance era. Moreover, in the competitive environment of Renaissance Florence, Leonardo found himself in a notable rivalry with Michelangelo. The intense competition between these two iconic artists, marked by mutual disdain, played a crucial role in pushing them to achieve artistic excellence. This rivalry, while characterized by personal animosity, reflected a broader historical pattern where competitors often turned into collaborators, contributing to the rich artistic tapestry of the time. Eric Weiner discusses the central question he faced when writing his book, The Geography of Genius: How to Define Genius. He presents his unconventional definition, asserting that genius is essentially a social consensus. It is someone who society collectively agrees is a genius. Weiner emphasizes that the common debate about whether genius is innate, born, or developed, made, oversimplifies the concept. He leans toward the idea that genius is grown, rejecting the notion that it's solely a result of genetics. While he acknowledges the importance of hard work in developing geniuses, he argues that it doesn't fully explain the phenomenon of genius clusters in certain places and times. To support his argument, Weiner cites examples such as Mozart, who exhibited prodigious talent at a young age. Despite this early display of brilliance, Weiner suggests that genetics plays only a small role in the overall genius puzzle. Instead, he posits that, specifically, The environment and cultural context of certain locations, like Renaissance Florence, classical Athens, or contemporary Silicon Valley, where 50% of startups are created by people who are foreign-born, contribute significantly to the concentration of geniuses in those areas. Crucially, the ideal environment is not necessarily one of ease, wealth, or abundance. To the contrary, Weiner claims that one of the biggest misperceptions about places of genius I'm discovering is that they are akin to paradise. They are not. Paradise is antithetical to genius. Paradise makes no demands, and creative genius takes root through meeting demands in new and imaginative ways. The Athenians matured because they were challenged on all fronts, said Nietzsche, in a variation of his famous "what doesn't kill you will make you stronger" line. In other words, it was a productive rivalry, and not easy fame and unquestioning support that spurred Da Vinci on to greatness. In an interview, Paul Solman concluded that, for Eric Weiner, the final ingredients of genius seem pretty clear. A rich city with bustle, competition, cooperation, and, above all, openness to the new, the foreign. This may pose something of a mindset shift for those looking to develop their potential. The project of genius is not a purely individualistic and private one, but rather something like a co-creation that emerges from something bigger. Now, the Renaissance is over, and not everyone agrees that it was a golden age, but there's a lot we can take from our understanding of the period when it comes to creating our own optimal learning environments. Cultivate a diverse and open environment. Look for places that embrace diversity and openness to new ideas. Genius often thrives in cosmopolitan and culturally rich environments. Cities like ancient Athens and Vienna, which welcomed foreigners and immigrants, provided a melting pot of ideas and perspectives. Seek communities where people from different backgrounds and disciplines can interact, fostering a culture of collaboration, competition, and exchanging ideas. This can be rather difficult in the modern world, where polarization, extremism, and intolerance of anything outside the dominant ideology abounds. As you look for this kind of environment, realize that you are also able to actively cultivate it yourself. Try to buck the trend of seeking only those who are already like yourself, and instead prioritize fruitful communication and interaction over agreement. Prioritize competition and cooperation. Consider environments that strike a balance between healthy competition and cooperation. Genius clusters, such as Renaissance Florence, were competitive spaces where individuals like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo pushed each other to excel. There was also cooperation and the sharing of ideas, however. Look for places that encourage both friendly competition and a collaborative spirit, creating an atmosphere that challenges individuals to reach their full potential. There's much to say on this point, but it comes down to a wholesome spirit of collaboration that emerges out of struggle and opposition. The attitude will be your own as much as it is others. The masters of old envisioned their work as their ultimate source and goal. A fellow artist may be your competition, but they were ultimately laboring under the same universal masters of truth and beauty, and were therefore always due a certain degree of respect and fellowship. Try to seek out and genuinely consider critique and feedback. Realize that even your enemies are your teachers, since they can help you evolve to standards of excellence far higher than a well-meaning friend might. Embrace interdisciplinarity and innovation. choose settings that encourage interdisciplinary thinking and innovation. The Renaissance man was not a specialist, but a fully developed and rounded human being. Even today, a classical education has hints of the earlier model that considered a complete education to be one that included languages, civics, physical training, music, philosophy, mathematics, natural sciences, oration, and more. Weiner believes that today we have pigeonholed ourselves so much that it's hard to break out. It's hard for a biologist to write about physics. It's hard for an art historian to talk about aeronautical engineering. This definitely wasn't the case in Da Vinci's era. On an individual level, what we call genius often emerges when individuals cross boundaries and investigate ideas that span a variety of fields. It's a relatively modern tendency to break down knowledge into subjects whose experts are unintelligible to one another. The Renaissance thinkers excelled because they did not see the world divided up in this way and sought theories and innovations that were more holistic and total. Seek places that break down silos, allowing for the exchange of ideas between different disciplines. The Viennese coffee houses, for example, were so-called third places that facilitated conversations between people with diverse viewpoints, fueled, no doubt, by rather a lot of caffeine. Find environments that promote the mixing of ideas and perspectives, fostering a dynamic and innovative atmosphere. Be curious about outsiders, or be one yourself. Weiner says, someone who is fully invested in the status quo is not going to be a genius. They're not going to rock the boat. They're almost always outsiders. But I want to say they're not fully outsiders. They're what I call insider outsiders. It makes sense that if you are curious in the new, the different, and the progressive, the best people to consult are those who are able to view the dominant culture from the outside, i.e., with enough distance to gain a different insight on what is taken for granted. Try to meet with people who are originals and genuinely countercultural, or else find ways to explore that otherness in yourself. The people we encounter, the conversations we have, and the narratives we immerse ourselves in have immense power to either limit or expand our own perception. Be mindful of the people you interact with, the media you consume, the build environment you engage with, and the social narratives you're enmeshed with. The name of the game is not diversity for its own sake, but fruitful conversation, even if that means sparks fly. Weiner explains, almost all of these genius clusters throughout history have been cities, and Athens wasn't a huge city, but it was very dense. There were lots of interactions, and it was an urban life that we might recognize today. People trading and gossiping and getting together for these drunken symposia where they would recite poetry and drink wine. But you don't have to literally move to a big city or get drunk on wine to achieve similar results. Today, the internet allows us access to people from all over the world. This requires extra discernment, but can be an effective way to build networks that exceed those that were ever possible in the past. Depending on your goals and what you're trying to learn, ask yourself where the physical epicenter of your craft or industry or field is. Who are the key players, and where are they? If genius is a collaborative effort, then it makes sense to think about not just your literal environment, but your social environment too. Your mentor or teacher, for example, may help you make those important connections. But perhaps even more importantly, knowing the right people can allow you to start taking in some of the zeitgeist of your chosen field. Connect with other students, teachers who aren't your own, and also any important nodes in the social network. Weiner makes a direct comparison with fashion. There are fashions in intellectual circles, in industry, in tech, in art, in the hard sciences, in journalism, everywhere. Likewise, there are people who are trendsetters and key players. In your field, who are they? Now, this vision of genius may seem a little discouraging. In many ways, it directly contradicts the lone genius archetype so prevalent in modern mythology in the West. You're probably well acquainted with this story by now, as it's been played out so heavily in popular media. The genius, we're told, is someone who comes into the world with his intelligence and talents already fully installed. They achieve with ease and in complete isolation, mostly to impress and intimidate others. Their success is merely a question of them being recognized and rewarded, a process that is inevitable and requires little effort on the part of the genius. The modern-day genius, in other words, is a solitary superstar, a kind of celebrity. The story may in fact be the complete opposite of this. If we take the Renaissance era as our model, the many geniuses produced during this era were part of clusters and groups and networks, all mutually sharing and cross-pollinating ideas, competing, collaborating, and sometimes outright battling one another. Their genius is one they cultivated slowly, bit by bit, as a product of social engagement and fruitful dialogue. Their path was complicated, but virtuous. The classical genius, then, is a hero in the more traditional sense, a flower blooming on the tree, but one that would nevertheless not have existed without the tree. Once you've found a suitable mentor, or mentors, to guide you on your path, pay some attention to your overall social and cultural environment. Think about your goals when it comes to the skill you're trying to develop, and ask about the kind of context that will be most supportive. If you cannot physically be in the ideal location, how can you access certain networks, information, or groups in other ways? If you've found the right mentor, this is precisely the kind of thing they can help you with. Another thing to try is to identify both your rivals and your collaborators. They may be the same people. Are there other apprentices who are on the same path as you? Further along, perhaps? Identify them and figure out how you might start to engage them. You might find yourself spurred on by entering competitions appropriate to your level, or joining groups where you can be assured of lively back and forth and plenty of encouragement to do better. Become a resonance reader. Reading maketh a full man, conference a ready man, and writing an exact man. Francis Bacon. Your goal may be to become a language virtuoso, a better musician, a more adept painter, a free-thinking author or creative, a builder, an artisan, a crafting genius, a poet, or a master of the physical form, whether that's expressed in dance, martial arts, or feats of physical endurance. No matter what you're trying to accomplish, however, one thing is clear: reading will help you do it better. Yes, even the martial arts. Leonardo da Vinci was famous for his painting, but he was also extremely accomplished as a scientist, sculptor, draftsman, inventor, architect, and general theorist. He's widely considered the world's first true Renaissance man and the standard for what we now consider a polymath, a person considered to have knowledge that widely spans many different areas. The word polymath comes to us from the Greek, with poly meaning much or many, and mathes meaning learning. It's not at all a coincidence that every individual who is considered a polymath is also a person known to be an avid, even obsessive reader of the written word. In fact, it's hard to imagine a person having learned much without access to books. Da Vinci's thirst for knowledge led him to build a substantial collection of books. He benefited from the very recent invention of printing in Germany, coincidentally sharing the same age as the printing press. Another hint about the nature of the genius clusters that so fascinated Weiner. In Da Vinci's time, however, many books were still hand-copied and astonishingly precious. But Da Vinci didn't only consume the written word, he produced it too. When he passed away, at the age of 67, he left behind an extensive legacy of over 6,000 pages of notebooks. These notebooks contained a wealth of content, including anatomical studies, military inventions, sketches of nature, and notes derived from the books he'd accessed in various libraries. This gives us a hint not only of the size of his love for books, but of his character. This was not a man who collected books for their own sake, admiring the aesthetics of a well-coordinated bookshelf, or reading the Renaissance version of the bestseller list just because it was popular. Rather, books were instrumental. They served a very specific purpose in the life of the polymath. Being a Renaissance reader involved a different approach to reading compared to modern readers. During the Renaissance, the printing press revolutionized book production, making books more affordable and accessible. This accessibility, however, comes with a downside, as the sheer volume of available books created a certain noise in the literary world. In contrast to the modern reader, who faces an overwhelming abundance of choices, a Renaissance reader like Leonardo had a more limited selection. But what he had access to was almost always of exceptional quality. Fewer people were literate, and the barrier to entry for publishing a work was extremely high. No book was published unless it demonstrably added to what came before. This meant that although books were costly and relatively scarce, they were of an entirely different quality. The world of mass paperback printing and high-volume but disposable entertainment reading was many decades to come. Instead, a reader could expect to encounter material that was serious, rich, rarefied, and intended for audience who possessed the patience, education, and intellectual sophistication to make real use of what they found in those pages. To illustrate this point nicely, consider that Da Vinci considered himself a man without learning, and strived continually to learn new languages, filling his library with dictionaries and grammar books to better access the knowledge he felt he lacked. Standards, in other words, were sky high. Books would have been read slowly, carefully, and patiently, and often reread again and again. Diligent students were expected to know Latin and maybe a little Greek, and learning in a completely different language was par for the course. Well-formed and elegant handwriting was non-negotiable, and students of all kinds were expected to have exceptional memories and recite vast tracts of text by heart, an achievement almost unimaginable to modern man. Reading was not a passive activity, but an extension of what was seen as the ultimate learning format, conversation. The student was thus always in dialogue with the material that they read and would actively engage by taking notes, writing rebuttals, and composing letters and other responses. The author may indeed be known in their social circle. Da Vinci's biographer, Walter Isaacson, explained how books and notebooks became a kind of external brain and a way to process and shape certain paths of learning. The young Leonardo would watch wild birds for hours on end, but then he would sit down and recreate what he had seen and learned on the pages of his notebook, sketching out the designs of their wings, allowing that architecture to settle into his brain and develop into new ideas. In fact, he sketched his famous Vitruvian Man in this co-creative manner. He studied the works of the famous Vitruvius, who was an ancient Roman architect and civil engineer, and then designed a kind of pictorial response, both expressing his understanding of the work, but simultaneously expanding it. Books then were a powerful technology that enabled the educated man to converse, as it were, with people from different times and places, so that new ideas and understandings could be generated, then shared again. On Da Vinci's bookshelf, you might have found hand-drawn maps from famous cartographers and explorers, a printing of Aesop's fables, the Divine Comedy, in Italian, of course, Ovid's Metamorphoses, richly illustrated anatomy and medical texts, a few Latin dictionaries, a book by Benedetto de Labaco, who instituted the use of Arabic numerals, many mathematical treatises, illuminated religious manuscripts, both original and copied, and many major and minor works on botany, hydraulics, mechanics, and cosmology. If you wanted to emulate the great polymaths of old, there's surely a lesson here. Strive to have a bookshelf that makes you hard to categorize. With Da Vinci as our model, how can we go about planning our own self-education on those well-traveled paths of the printed word? First, and most importantly, this style of reading is not so much a what as it is a how. The reading is a means to an end. What matters is the active and curious engagement of knowledge and its mechanisms. It just so happens that reading and writing are one of the most effective tools we have for this kind of intellectual activity. Let's take a look at some ways to embody the Renaissance approach to our own reading. Design your reading environment. Reading is a lifelong activity. It should play a permanent and central role in your life, whatever your chosen disciplines and subjects. That means that it should be built into your daily routine, along with everything else you do almost automatically. Depending on your resources, consider investing in a proper desk, a suitable light source, and other accessories that enhance your focus and comfort during reading sessions. The more your reading space inspires or welcomes you, the more at home you'll feel there. Can you include easy access to pens, papers, notebooks, and other items to help you engage with your material? Depending on your subject, you might like to invest in a few pieces of stationery to help you stay organized, such as shelves, files, folders, highlighters, corkboards, sticky notes, and so on. Classical paintings from this era show lush studios and drawing rooms that were as much works of art as they were practical learning spaces. A common practice was to place a skull on the desk, a memento mori, or other religious items or decorative knickknacks from far-off places to denote prestige or bring some beauty, mysticism, or inspiration to the space. You can follow suit by decorating your space in a way that reaffirms your own goals and intentions, as well as motivates you to keep pushing onward. Some simple ideas include beautiful pictures and paintings, trophies and certificates, vision boards, photos of loved ones, moving quotes and poetry, or symbolic ornaments that speak to your purpose. Actively engage with the text. Now on to the actual reading. Renaissance readers actively engaged with texts by having a pen in hand. Reading was a part of thinking. It was something you absorbed, digested, processed, and responded to. Men of learning from this period, Da Vinci included, marked up texts to fully comprehend meanings and implications. It was as though the author were right there in the room with them, delivering a lecture they fully intended the audience to stop and ask them questions about. Take notes, underline key passages, and interact with the text while reading. Consider keeping a commonplace book or learning notebook to collect and organize important information for future reference. For Da Vinci, this was a multimedia affair and contained snippets of verse, drawings, designs for inventions, and more. For the modern reader, you can keep your questions, objections, and responses either in a notebook or typed up on a computer. We'll be looking more at exactly how to take effective notes in a later chapter, but the most effective method will always be the one you devise for yourself, since it will fit your life, your goals, and your needs perfectly. Have both a practical and an intellectual goal. Much later on, as literacy rates climbed and reading became more popular, things like novels abounded, and more ordinary people had access to material of all kinds, not just heavyweight academic manuscripts. It became possible to read simply for entertainment or even distraction. During the Renaissance era, this attitude would have seemed absurd. Instead, reading was done with a purpose. Every intellectual effort was aimed at some definite practical or intellectual goals, usually a mix of both, and only the extremely idle elite would attempt an education merely as an ornament to courtly life, and not truly intended to be put to use. Today, the sheer volume of information out there means that no human being can process it within a single lifetime. This means that you are necessarily limited and must choose. Goals are a way to focus and prioritize. They help you chart a route through the noise and distraction. If you understand why you're reading before you even pick up a book, your attention will be more alive and targeted than if you had read with no special aim in particular. Whether it's for academic, professional, or personal reasons, read with the intention of using the knowledge gained. Go in with unanswered questions and let your curiosity bring the words to life for you. Some additional things to try. Actively consider how the material can be applied or incorporated into your own work and thinking. It may apply to a completely different area than the one you're investigating. Make a note, make connections, and follow up later. Write your questions in the margins as you read. Alternatively, pause now and then to digest what you've read and guess what will be said next. This way, you're teaching yourself to not just read, but think along with the author. You'll gain so much more insight this way. Similarly, express your disagreement or concerns in the margins too. Have you read a counter-argument to this one? Where? Weigh it all up. Get into the habit of skimming and scanning before you read in depth. Look at the titles and subtitles, labels or diagrams, graphs, and so on. Try to understand a piece in the broadest terms first, then dig in, summarizing each section and even paragraph for its main point. Read bibliographies. Follow references made by authors you like to see who they are reading. It's not going to recreate Renaissance Europe, but it's a surprisingly effective way to enter into certain ideological networks where you can really begin to grasp more wide-reaching themes. Summary. Leonardo da Vinci was a Renaissance-era polymath, painter, inventor, scientist, artisan, draftsman, philosopher, botanist, sculptor, and musician. By studying his life and philosophy, we can imbue our own lives with a little of his famous curiosity. The first step is to secure an appropriate mentor. Born to humble beginnings, Da Vinci was self-taught and apprenticed himself at the age of 14 to a master painter who tutored him. He was diligent and deferred to him in all things, understanding the importance of consistent practice and training. Follow the correct mentoring process, beginning with deep observation, passive mode, then skills acquisition, practice mode, and finally experimentation, active mode. A good mentor should be a genuine expert in their field, know how to get the most from their students, and not be threatened if the student surpasses them. They should be able to demonstrate open-mindedness to approaches other than their own, and be able to point to past students who have excelled. Be mindful of your environment, which is also a kind of tutor, influencing the character and development of your thought. Seek a diverse and open environment where bustle, competition, cooperation, newness, and difference are the norm. Be welcoming to outsiders and outsider thought, embracing interdisciplinarity with others unlike yourself. Find ways to collaborate and connect. To be a Renaissance reader, develop a consistent habit of both reading and note-taking. Build daily routines based in a well-crafted learning environment and actively engage with the text, continually comparing it against your goals and intentions. Read widely, diligently, and strategically, and do it every single day. This has been Leonardo da Vinci's Mental Models, Secrets of the World's Most Famous Polymath, written by Peter Hollins, narrated by Russell Newton. Copyright 2024 by Peter Hollins. Production copyright by Peter Hollins.